Hi, I'm Mike Beliveau, and today we're going to take a look at one of my favorite classic Western TV series, Have Gun, Will Travel. Now, this series starred Richard Boone, and he played a West Point graduate and former Army officer who is currently a gun for hire. Now, as usual, I'm going to warn you that I'll be starting out with some background on the show. So if all you want to see are the guns, and there are plenty of them to see, then what you need to do is hit that magic fast forward button and go until you see a gun, and then just start watching there, and you won't have to put up with all the background. But if you're interested in the background, here we go. Now, I have to admit, I loved this show as a kid, and I still love it. In fact, I've got the box set of DVDs for the series, and I have to say it holds up. It is as good today as it was in the 1950s and 1960s. It's absolutely one of the best Western TV shows ever to be on the air. In fact, when I got the box set of DVDs and started watching it as an adult, I realized that as much as I enjoyed the show as a kid, you have to be an adult to fully appreciate it. There are a lot of nuances in this show. And in a lot of ways, socially, it was ahead of its time. And it just really holds up. The writing is excellent. Scripts are tight. Richard Boone is just phenomenal. I can't imagine anyone else in that job. In Have Gun, Will Travel, Richard Boone's character is known only as Paladin. His real name is never given. It did appear in an unauthorized Paladin novel after the series was over, but most people who are Have Gun, Will Travel aficionados simply do not accept that. That was basically appropriation of a character that was not deserved. So Paladin is it. No first name, no last name, just Paladin. And the word Paladin actually comes from the principal knights, though that's a little bit ahead of knighthood, but the principal warriors and leaders who supported the Emperor Charlemagne in Europe in the 9th century AD, and then became, famous in story and song. A lot like the King Arthur legends, or a lot of Charlemagne and his paladins type stories. The most famous one, of course, is Roland and his death at Roncesvalles. So that's where the word paladin comes from, and that's why his representation is a chess knight, because a paladin is essentially a medieval knight. And like a medieval knight, Richard Boone's character, Paladin, has a finely honed sense of honor. And he will not take work that he thinks is dishonorable. He often will look at both sides of the equation, and you might not get exactly what you think you're paying for if you hire a Paladin. But generally, you get what you deserve. So it's kind of an interesting twist. I mean, the idea might sound a little bit cheesy, and I have to admit that a lot of Western shows use the trope of the lone gunfighter traveling across the West to right wrongs. That's certainly not unique to Paladin. It's a little bit cheesy. But what saved it in this case are two things. One is Richard Boone's acting and just his charisma on the screen. And the second is the excellent writing. Have Gun, Will Travel was blessed with just some wonderful writers. And the writing on the show is crisp. I mean, these are half-hour shows, so you don't have a lot of time to develop things, and there's no room for anything extraneous. Okay? Everything has got to be supporting that show. It's got to drive the plot forward. It's got to drive the character forward. There's no time to waste in a half-hour show. Now, a lot of the house writers for Have Gun, Will Travel became famous in their own rights. Gene Roddenberry was one of the writers, and he went on to create Star Trek, as everyone knows. Bruce Geller, another writer for the show, created Mission Impossible. And Harry Julian Fink helped to create the Dirty Harry franchise of movies that Clint Eastwood is justifiably famous for. And finally, Sam Peckinpah, who was a writer on the series, went on to direct famous movies like The Wild Bunch. So they had quite an illustrious group of staff writers on Have Gun Will Travel, and the quality shows in the scripts. In the series, Paladin is known by his business card, which reads, Have Gun Will Travel, Wire Paladin, San Francisco. That's it. And that was enough to bring him in business, and business was good. His standard fee was $1,000 to do a job. Now, that was a princely sum in the mid-1870s. This was a time when a trained machinist, which is one of the most skilled trades, earned $800 a year. So $1,000 per assignment was quite a princely sum. And Paladin needed that money because when he wasn't working, he lived quite luxuriously at the Hotel Carlton in San Francisco, where he maintained a permanent suite. Now, one of the key aspects of the show was to show the contrast between Paladin at leisure at the Hotel Carlton in San Francisco and Paladin when he was on the job. At home in San Francisco, Paladin lived on Pacific Avenue in an opulent suite. He dressed like quite a dandy in the height of 1870s fashion. And noticeably, his clothes in San Francisco are all light colored. And that's in contrast to when he was on the job, where he dressed in rough trail clothes and wore all black. So, white hat when he was at leisure, black hat on the job. Now, the series was created by Sam Rolfe and Herb Meadow. And believe it or not, it was originally planned to be a modern detective series. So, thank goodness they decided to change that premise and give us Have Gun Will Travel as a Western. Now, Have Gun Will Travel debuted in 1957, and for that year, it was the 4th highest rated TV show. For the next 3 years, it moved up to the number 3 spot. And for its entire run, it was one of the most popular Westerns and most popular TV shows ever produced. So that's the end of the background. Now let's get down to the guns. And we'll start by talking about Paladin's handguns. In the first episode of the show, Paladin explains that his gun is a custom-made Hamilton. Okay? Crafted specifically for him, and that he was expert in its use. And he said, and I quote, "The balance is perfect. The trigger responds to the pressure of 1 ounce. Look closely at the inside of the barrel," Paladin says. "Those lines are rifling, a rarity in a hand weapon." Okay, so that little speech is patently ridiculous. First of all, almost every handgun by that time had a rifled barrel. That is not at all a rarity. That's what's required for any sort of real accuracy. A 1 ounce trigger pull is frankly dangerous. That'll go off by breathing on it. I don't care how expert you are. The latest trigger pull I've ever had in a single action was 1.5 pounds, and that was too light. It was a gun that was specifically tuned just for target shooting. You would not want to use that in any sort of combat situation. So a 1 ounce trigger pull, these guys are just pulling the longbow. Unfortunately, it does show somewhat of a lack of understanding of firearms, or you just wouldn't say stuff like that. But they're trying to establish the premise that he has a real expert's weapon. Now, it's not a custom-made Hamilton, which doesn't exist. It is a Colt single-action army. So what Paladin really carried on the show was a Colt single-action army with a 7.5-inch barrel and black grips. Most of Paladin's guns were finished in black, bluing, dark bluing, not color case hardened. That's not always the case. And most of his guns came from Stembridge's, prop house, gun rental. And some of them were not in great shape. And that's just the nature of the beast of these TV Westerns. They used a better gun for close-ups than they did for some of the action scenes because they just had a variety of guns that they went through. The gun had walnut grips. And to give it the all-black appearance, they were just painted black. And that was one of the things we had with TV in the 50s and 60s is it was fairly low resolution. It's not like the high-def TV you've got today. And you didn't get a lot of close-ups of the gun anyway. But in the opening sequence, you always did get a close-up of his gun and holster. And they used a better quality gun for that shot because you were really going to see it. Now, Paladin's belt and holster rig is as iconic as his revolver. In fact, it is more iconic than his revolver because it's one of the most distinctive and easily identified pieces of gear that he used. It was an all-black Buscadero rig, drop loop, fast draw holster. It was made by Arvo Ajala. And it was one of Ajala's standard, almost tubular holsters, steel-lined, so you could begin cocking it while it was still in the holster. But the thing that really set this apart was a silver chest piece, silver knight, basically, mounted in the center of the holster. And that's what made it the distinctive Paladin rig. Well, I liked Paladin's gun and belt and holster rig so much that I made up my own tribute set based on it. So I made from scratch a Buscadero gun belt, and I reconfigured a vintage Hunter holster to look like Paladin's holster. And I took an actual 7.5-inch barreled Colt single-action army, 3rd generation, and I didn't paint the grips, but I outfitted it with black buffalo horn grips to make a reasonable facsimile of Paladin's rig. And I'll do a video on that in the future when I'm able to get to the range. And I'll probably give you an update on my health condition pretty soon. But just to give you the answer in the back of the book, I'm going to have a hip replacement in a couple of months. But after that, I should be back in the swing of things, and you'll get to see this rig in action. Now, besides his trusty single-action army, a.k.a. the Hamilton, Paladin always carried a Derringer with him, and that was carried tucked behind his gun belt, near the buckle, where he could carry it surreptitiously and get it out when needed. In the pilot episode, this was a .41 caliber Remington double-barreled over and under type Derringer. In subsequent episodes in the first season, quite a few of them, he switched to a single-shot .41 caliber Colt Model 3 Derringer. Not sure why. But the 1866 comes back later in the first series, and then it appears throughout the rest of the series as the standard double-barreled over and under Remington Derringer. But several different ones were used. He's got Derringers that have white grips and Derringers that have black grips, and there's no explanation between the two. And there's occasional continuity problems with that. But they just had to find a variety of Remington Derringers to be able to sub in and out. So that's what you got. So those are Paladin's handguns. Now, as far as Paladin's rifles go, his standard go-to rifle, which is rarely used during the series. In fact, sometimes he doesn't even have a rifle and a saddle scabbard on his horse, but at other times he does. Sometimes the scabbard faces forward, sometimes it faces back. Then I make a lot of changes. But he's carrying the ubiquitous 1892 Winchester, which just about every TV show and movie at the time relied on, even though it's completely anachronistic to the mid 1870s when the show was supposedly set. But that's what everybody's using, and there you go. So that's what he uses most of the time when he uses a rifle. Not every time. In season 2, in episode 5, called A Duel at Florence, the character that he's working for is actually using a Winchester model 1873. Very, very nice one. And that is certainly more appropriate to the era. Why they didn't do more of those, I don't know. But Paladin himself is using one of the big Winchester 1876s. The Model 76 is like the Model 73, except it's upsized to be able to handle very large bottleneck cartridges to give you a high-powered hunting rifle option, because the 73 is basically 4440, 3840, 3220 pistol cartridges, right? So the Winchester folks made the 76 to handle 4575s, 4060s, and just a whole variety. In fact, 50, 110, I think, is the biggest cartridge it's got. But a whole variety of heavy rifle calibers that provided a magazine rifle. It provided a repeater that could fire those buffalo and elk stopping characters. And the one that Paladin borrows from a frontiersman on the scene is the musket stocked model, which is the carbine. So the carbine had like a full stock, like a military stock on it. And that's what Paladin uses in that episode, which is very cool. In fact, I wish he carried that for the entire series. Now, we'll see some other guns used. In one episode, Paladin teams up with a bounty hunter who, looks like an old-time mountain man. And the bounty hunter is armed with a Model 1863 percussion Sharps that takes paper cartridges. And there's even some discussion about that. So that's a pretty cool choice. And there are several episodes where Paladin uses a double-barrel side hammer shotgun. And it looks like an 1878 Colt to me. And he uses that probably. And it's always a gun he's borrowed from somebody else or taken from a bad guy or something like that. It's not like he's carrying it by habit. But pretty much looks like the same gun. And that's used quite often in the series. Now, I'm also going to give honorable mention to the 1873 Trapdoor Springfield rifle. This is not a Paladin carry gun, but there's an episode where he wins a case of those in a poker game. He knows he's won a case of rifles and ammunition, and he goes to check them out, and he is disgusted because he said, well, I knew they're probably not going to be great, but I had no idea they'd be relics from the War of 1812, which, of course, they are not. They are 1870s, 1880 vintage Trapdoor Springfields. And the interesting thing about them is, since this show is ostensibly set in 1876 or so, is that those guns would have only been 3 years old. They would have been the state of the art for the U.S. military at the time. They would not have been a bunch of old junkers as he portrays them to be. So I just find that to be kind of ironic. So those are, for the most part, the Paladin long guns. Now I'm going to finish off with just a couple of bonus guns from the series. The fourth season of the series had a great episode called The Killing of Jessie May. And the main guest star on that was a very young Robert Blake. You may remember from playing Beretta, the detective show, when he was on Spanky and Our Gang when he was a kid, the whole bit. And that episode was directed by Richard Boone himself. In fact, he directed, I think, 25 or so episodes. He's one of the most used directors on the series. And this is an excellent episode, but it's notable for two different guns. Harry Rhodes played a former slave who was armed with a beautiful Colt Model 1861 Navy 36 caliber cap and ball revolver, which he uses during the show. And that's one of the nicest navies that you're going to see. It's not beat up. It's really kind of pristine. So it's a beautiful gun for him to use. But the real interesting gun in this episode was carried by Robert Blake himself. And in the series, they call that an automatic shotgun. But it is not automatic at all. What it is a multi-barreled shotgun. It's got 6 barrels. It breaks open like a double-barrel shotgun and loads from the breech, which is just weird. It's massive. It's on a tripod. And it fires each barrel sequentially. It looks a lot like a knock volley gun, but it's not. First of all, it's cartridge firing, and they don't all go off at once. Like a knock volley gun, you fire once and 7 barrels go off, firing 54 caliber, rifle round balls at you. This gun looks like that, but it's not. It fires sequentially. It's quite an interesting piece. It appears to actually function, and I have no idea what it is. If it was ever, a production or a military gun, I don't know. I have not been able to find it. So if any of you know, let me know in the comments, because I'm quite interested in this gun. My research has turned up no commercially made gun of this type. But it was great to watch, and I'll tell you what, it did quite a bit of damage. So those are pretty much all the guns in the Have Gun Will Travel TV series. If you enjoyed this look at the guns, let me know. I hope you did. Thumbs up, share, comment. Love to hear your comments on it. And until next time, bye.